To a story with origins many centuries ago. Scientists have recently unraveled the genetic code of the Black Plague and are studying its relevance for our modern age.
For centuries, the true origin of the Black Death remained one of history's most enduring mysteries. Between 1347 and 1353, this plague killed an estimated 50 to 60% of Europe's population.
The microbe that caused the Black Death killed some 30 million people in Western Europe in the mid-14th century. Researchers have long tried to understand how the bacterium really could have been that deadly.
Now, cutting-edge analysis of ancient DNA has pinpointed where it all began, offering the first definitive answer to a question that has baffled historians and scientists for over 600 years. This breakthrough reshapes our understanding of the deadliest pandemic in human history. Tracing the Black Death. The Black Death struck medieval Europe with a force so devastating that it felt like a biblical apocalypse. For centuries, people imagined its arrival through grim images, plague ships docking in Italian harbors, rats slipping through the cramped streets of London, and bodies stacked high in the churchyards of Paris. But what if the true beginning of this catastrophe did not happen in Europe at all?
You've probably heard of the Black Death, one of the most fatal pandemics in human history.
Recent discoveries have shifted the search for the plague's origin thousands of kilometers eastward, to the mountainous heart of Central Asia. The breakthrough came from two forgotten cemeteries, Kara Jagach and Burana. These sites, excavated in the 19th century, held 118 graves, many bearing headstones dated to the year 1338 or 1339, with inscriptions blaming a mysterious pestilence for the deaths. This is nearly a decade before the Black Death began sweeping across Europe. But why look here? The region was a major hub in the Silk Road network, linking China, the Middle East, and Europe.
We know, for example, that the Black Death originated in China, and what we can do with these skeletons, we can take a tiny sample, say from the teeth.
Traders passing through carried not just goods like silk and spices, but also invisible passengers, fleas and bacteria capable of sparking pandemics. Archaeological evidence from these graves included goods from distant lands, proving their direct involvement in long-distance trade. This raises a question for you. If global trade connects us today, could history repeat itself in the same way? The real breakthrough didn't come from medieval chronicles, papal records, or royal decrees. It came from something far less glamorous, the forgotten field notes of a Russian archaeologist from 1886. His meticulous descriptions and sketches guided researchers back to the exact graves more than a century later. From there, modern science took over. Researchers carefully extracted DNA from the teeth of plague victims who had been silent for nearly 700 years.
And look at the DNA, at the pathogen, and fit it into that picture, and thereby learn more about the plague and the Black Death.
Using advanced genomic sequencing, they identified Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that caused the Black Death, in its earliest known pandemic strain.
The plague is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, and most of the time humans get it from a flea bite.
This provided the strongest evidence yet that the pandemic's deadly wave began in Central Asia before moving west along trade routes. Think about that, one of history's deadliest events, killing an estimated 50 million people, can now be traced back through time with such precision that we can pinpoint its starting point to a specific region and even specific burial sites. Plague began in Kyrgyzstan. The Black Death, the pandemic that devastated Europe in the 14th century, has now been traced back to Central Asia, specifically near Lake Issyk-Kul in present-day Kyrgyzstan. Scientific research suggests the plague's ancestral strain originated in this region around the years 1338 or 1339. This discovery comes from archaeological work that began as a routine excavation, but quickly turned into one of the most significant breakthroughs in understanding the origins of the most deadly pandemic in recorded history. The site in question lies near the village of Kajagosh. Archaeologists were exploring two small cemeteries belonging to a once thriving Christian trading post along the Silk Road. Initially, they expected to find ordinary graves from the medieval period. Instead, they uncovered dozens of gravestones with precise dates carved into them, 1338 and 1339. These years stand out because they come nearly a full decade before the Black Death was first documented in Europe.
None of us have ever seen this. I mean, I'm shocked to hear about these cases now.
The gravestones were inscribed in ancient Syriac, telling the life stories of merchants, craftsmen, and families who lived and traded in this crossroads of civilizations. Among them, one particular inscription caught the attention of the Russian excavation team. It marked the resting place of a man named Sanmak, identified as a believer in the local Christian community. The inscription stated plainly that he had died of pestilence. What makes this significant is that further examination of these graves went beyond historical records. Researchers extracted ancient DNA from the remains, and the results confirmed the presence of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the plague. This is direct biological evidence linking this small settlement in Central Asia to the outbreak that would later kill tens of millions across continents. The location itself makes sense in the context of history. This was a major trading hub along the Silk Road, a route that connected the east to the west, allowing not only goods but also diseases to travel vast distances. If the plague began here, it would have had direct pathways into China, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. For centuries, the origins of the Black Death were debated. Some theories pointed to China, others to the Caucasus or even European origins. But these findings from Lake Issyk-Kul provide one of the clearest and most direct pieces of evidence yet, narrowing the starting point to a specific place and time. Secrets beneath bones. The earliest descriptions of bubonic plague symptoms can be traced back to a fragment by Rufus of Ephesus, preserved by the physician Oribasius. These ancient records suggest that bubonic plague was present in the Roman Empire even before the reign of Emperor Trajan, around 6 centuries before it struck Pelusium during the reign of Justinian I. In 2013, scientific analysis confirmed what historians had long suspected. The Plague of Justinian, which began in 541 CE and recurred until around 750 CE, was caused by Yersinia pestis. This marked the beginning of what is known as the First Plague Pandemic. By 610 CE, Chinese physician Chao Yuanfang had documented a disease he described as a malignant bubo, a sudden onset of high fever accompanied by swollen lymph nodes beneath the skin. In the medieval world, such symptoms carried the weight of divine punishment. Imagine the fear, an invisible killer capable of erasing entire towns within weeks. Centuries later, archaeologists working in Russia carefully unearthed human remains believed to be plague victims. They meticulously recorded each find.
The skeletons will soon be taken to the Museum of London Archaeology, where experts hope to find out more about who they were and how they died.
Placed the skeletal remains into protective containers and shipped them to St. Petersburg. There, they were stored in what would later become the Peter the Great Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography. And then, silence. The bones remained untouched for over 100 years as the world moved on. Empires rose and fell. 2 world wars reshaped the globe. The space race began. Yet, deep in the museum's archives, the bones waited, still holding their deadly secret. Fast forward to the early 2000s. Dr. Philip Slavin, a medieval historian at the University of Stirling in Scotland, was investigating the environmental and economic conditions that surrounded the Black Death. He specialized in finding meaning in data, tax records, grain prices, shipping logs, and climate patterns.
Whatever the scientists do find out, it looks like they've already solved the mystery of a long-lost burial site, and they expect to find many more skeletons in the months to come.
While combing through forgotten archaeological reports, Slavin stumbled across detailed notes from an 1886 Russian excavation. Buried in the records was an anomaly that immediately caught his attention. Think about it. These notes had been sitting in an archive for over a century, virtually ignored. What could they reveal about one of the deadliest diseases in human history? Could these forgotten bones provide the missing link that explains how the plague spread across continents? This was the spark that reignited a search through history, science, and archaeology. The plague's true source. Zoonotic spillover is the transmission of pathogens from animals to humans. It has been behind some of the most serious infectious disease outbreaks in history, including pandemics that reshaped human society. Preventing and understanding these events is vital for global health security. One such hotspot is the region around Lake Issyk-Kul, located in the Tian Shan Mountains of Central Asia. This area is known as a natural plague reservoir, meaning the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death, circulates naturally among wild animal populations. Here, large colonies of rodents such as marmots, great gerbils, and voles host the bacterium, with fleas acting as its primary vectors. Researchers believe that a significant climatic shift may have triggered the conditions for a spillover. Historical climate data suggest unusually warm and wet springs in the area during the early 14th century. These conditions caused vegetation to grow rapidly, providing abundant food for rodents. As a result, rodent populations surged. Now, think about what happens when you suddenly have far more rodents in one area. More rodents mean more fleas, and more fleas mean more opportunities for Yersinia pestis to spread. In a dense, thriving rodent population, the bacterium can multiply at an alarming rate. Eventually, the chances increase for it to jump from animals to humans. How could that leap have happened? One scenario involves a marmot hunted for its meat or fur. Marmots were common game animals in the region, and hunters could have come into direct contact with infected fleas while skinning or preparing the animal.
The disease is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, and in wild animals is mostly spread by fleas or by eating infected animals.
Once the bacterium infected humans, the stage was set for its rapid spread through trade and travel routes. But here's the critical question. How did an outbreak in this remote mountain area travel more than 3,500 kilometers to the Black Sea ports, where it would enter Europe and ignite the Black Death? The answer lies in the trade networks of the time. The Tian Shan region was connected to the Silk Road, a vast web of routes linking Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Caravans carrying goods, and unknowingly, infected fleas and rodents moved steadily westward. By the time these caravans reached trading hubs near the Black Sea, the disease had multiple opportunities to spread among merchants, sailors, and port cities.
Victims often died within a week, and the death toll quickly rose to over 25 million people.
Archaeological evidence from graves near Lake Issyk-Kul provided the final piece of the puzzle. Genetic analysis of remains confirmed the presence of Yersinia pestis, dating to just before the Black Death began in Europe. This linked the local outbreak directly to one of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history.
Now scientists have collected DNA from the bones of Black Death victims buried in a London cemetery.
Black Death's true origin. The Black Death was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, killing between 75 and 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and North Africa in the 14th century. For centuries, its origin was believed to be in the Mediterranean, but historian Philip Slavin from the University of Stirling uncovered evidence that challenged this view.
To a story with origins many centuries ago. Scientists have recently unraveled the genetic code of the Black Plague.
While studying historical records, Slavin noticed something unusual. In Kyrgyzstan, 2 cemeteries contained a cluster of burials from 1338 and 1339, nearly a decade before Europe's Great Mortality began. The gravestones bore the word pestilence, but in the Middle Ages, that term referred to many diseases. Slavin suspected this could be the start of the Black Death, but suspicion wasn't enough. Without DNA evidence, there was no way to prove it. If these burials were plague victims, it would place the pandemic's origin in the mountains of Central Asia, right along the Silk Road trade routes connecting East and West, not in Europe's port cities. This would mean the outbreak started thousands of kilometers from where historians had long believed. To confirm his theory, Slavin turned to scientists at Germany's Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. These paleogeneticists specialize in extracting and analyzing ancient DNA from centuries-old human remains. When Slavin shared his findings, they recognized the potential immediately. The Max Planck team had already been building a genetic family tree of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague. They had sequenced more than 300 samples, from modern rodent carriers to medieval plague victims across multiple continents. Their research revealed a critical moment in plague history, a genetic Big Bang in the early 14th century when a single ancestral strain suddenly split into 4 major lineages.
Researchers have long tried to understand how the bacterium really could have been that deadly.
Think about that. From one strain in Central Asia, 4 deadly variants emerged, spreading rapidly across continents. Could the Kyrgyzstan burials mark this exact turning point? If so, the question becomes, how did it move so fast? The answer lies in the extensive trade networks of the time. Caravans carried goods, and rats with infected fleas across the Silk Road. Ships linked Black Sea ports like Kafa to the Mediterranean. Once the bacterium reached Europe's overcrowded, unsanitary cities, it spread with devastating efficiency. This discovery doesn't just rewrite the history of the Black Death, it changes how we understand pandemics. A single outbreak in a remote location can, through human trade and movement, become a global disaster. How rats and trade routes unleashed the Black Death. The Black Death's spread wasn't random. It followed a precise path shaped by medieval trade and human movement. The main culprits were black rats, Rattus rattus, and the fleas they carried. These rats often hid in grain supplies, cargo holds, and market stalls, thriving wherever humans stored food. When caravans left the mountain passes carrying silk, spices, and other goods, they also carried an invisible threat. Think about it. Each caravan, each wagon, each merchant ship was a moving hub of possible infection. Fleas on rats carried the plague-causing bacterium Yersinia pestis, passing it to both animals and humans. Every stop along the Silk Road became a potential outbreak site. At trading posts, in crowded markets, and even in temporary desert camps, new populations of rats and the humans living alongside them were exposed. The disease did not race across continents at lightning speed. Instead, it advanced with the pace of trade itself, spreading steadily through the economic lifelines connecting East and West for over 1,000 years. The Silk Road, long celebrated for cultural and commercial exchange, became the very network that delivered one of history's deadliest pandemics. By the year 1346, this slow but relentless spread reached the Crimean Peninsula and the fortified port city of Kafa, modern-day Feodosia. This city was a critical link in the Black Sea trade.
So during this so-called Black Sea boom of the 13th to 15th centuries, a new wave of economic,
making it a prime target during conflicts. At that time, it was under siege by the Mongol army. Both sides soon faced the same invisible enemy, the plague. Here's where history takes a chilling turn. Contemporary chronicles describe a scene almost unthinkable. Mongol forces, weakened by the disease, decided to use it as a weapon. They loaded the plague-ridden corpses of their fallen soldiers onto catapults and hurled them over Kafa's walls. Imagine the panic among defenders, already struggling with starvation and siege conditions, suddenly facing the horrifying realization that their attackers were turning disease into a weapon. Historians consider this one of the earliest recorded cases of biological warfare. Whether the tactic worked as intended or simply coincided with the plague's inevitable spread, the results were catastrophic. Merchant ships fleeing Kafa carried infected rats and fleas to ports across the Mediterranean. Within months, the Black Death appeared in cities far from its original outbreak zone, claiming millions of lives over the next several years. Trade routes, which had once connected civilizations and enriched cultures, had also become channels for one of humanity's greatest tragedies. Siege of Kafa. The Siege of Kafa in 1346 is one of the most significant and debated events in the history of the Black Death.
AKA the Black Death, happened in Europe in the 14th century. It's thought that a ship arrived in Sicily with rats already infected.
The Mongol Golden Horde had surrounded the Genoese trading port of Kafa, located in present-day Feodosia, Crimea. During the siege, the Mongol forces were struck by a deadly outbreak of plague. Historical accounts report that, in an effort to break the stalemate, they hurled plague-infected corpses over the city walls using catapults. Was this truly the first example of biological warfare, or an exaggerated medieval story? The exact truth remains debated among historians. What is certain is what happened next. Fleeing Genoese merchants boarded ships to escape the siege. These ships carried black rats, infested with fleas, infected by Yersinia pestis.
The plague, Yersinia pestis, and the rats quickly spread the disease all across Europe.
The bacterium that causes plague. Sailing across the Black Sea, they reached Mediterranean ports such as Constantinople, Messina, Genoa, and Marseille. From there, the infection moved inland at alarming speed. Europe in the mid-14th century was the perfect environment for a deadly pandemic. Cities were densely packed, sanitation was poor, and rat populations had grown due to rapid urban expansion. Within just a few years, the Black Death killed between 75 million and 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and North Africa.
From the European, Middle Eastern, and North African populations that experienced the plague, and you're dealing with an autoimmune disease.
In some regions, up to 60% of the population died. The outbreak that began in the Tian Shan Mountains of Central Asia had, in less than a decade, reshaped the entire European continent. The consequences went beyond loss of life. Labor shortages weakened the feudal system. Religious institutions faced crises of faith, and trade routes were disrupted for decades. This event also shows how disease spreads along the networks of human commerce. The same dynamics that carried plague from Central Asia to Europe, trade routes, human migration, and environmental changes are still present today. The COVID-19 pandemic followed a remarkably similar path, a zoonotic spillover event, likely linked to ecological disruption, moving rapidly through modern global transportation systems. The story of Kafa's plague link was uncovered thanks to years of persistence in scientific research. Historian Philip Slavin re-examined overlooked records. German geneticists built extensive plague DNA databases, and Russian archaeologists preserved burial remains for over a century. Their combined efforts connected a 14th century outbreak to a modern understanding of pandemic origins. What if the next pandemic is already beginning in a remote corner of the world, in animal populations that no one is monitoring closely? And what other clues to past outbreaks might still be locked away in museum storage rooms, waiting to be found? The Black Death began with a single carved word: pestilence. 7 centuries later, it continues to teach us how fast disease can travel, how far it can reach, and how history can warn us about the threats of the future. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.